As part of marketing management this summer, I completed a MarkStrat simulation in which I marketed the product Sonites to a group of end customers. This presentation outlines the successes and the failures of the fictitious company that I led, called Magneto Industries, and the results that I had for over the course of the semester. I'll be sharing with you the following agenda. I'll start with an overview of the firm, followed by the performance of the firm, and look at it both from a segment perspective and also look at the financial data for the firm. At that point, I'll switch over to some of the marketing topics, and we'll look at the segmentation, the targeting, and the positioning. And we'll look at the 4 P's of the marketing mix: the product, the price, the place, and the promotion around the product that I marketed to the consumer segments. And then lastly, I thought it made the most sense to save the lessons learned for the end, so I can show you how I arrived at the lessons learned that I'm recommending as a result of this class. So starting with a firm overview, Magneto Industries operated for 6 periods. I produced the Sonites product in which I targeted 3 consumer segments. Now, one of the mistakes I made from early on in the class was that I opted to try to target more segments and quickly learned that with the marketing spend that I had, this wasn't enough to try to target so many consumers. So as a result, in the second period, I ramped this down and opted to target the 3 brands that I was manufacturing to the 3 segments outlined in the PowerPoint presentation. The first being that I targeted the Explorers consumer segment with the product Move. They're looking for a mid-price range product, really price-sensitive consumers, so I had to be cognizant and cautious of what I was charging them. The second brand I manufactured was Most, and with this brand I targeted the price-sensitive shoppers consumer segment. And the last brand that I had, the More brand, was a product of R&D that I chose to produce and market, and this was targeting the largest consumer segment, the savers, who are looking for a low performance and really average convenient product. So how did Magneto Industries do overall from both a firm and a segment performance perspective? Well, from a firm performance perspective, we started out on equal footing in the class. There were 6 teams competing against one another. I believe that early on I made some poor decisions trying to target too many brands at once, and as a result, my stock price index was impacted. So I started out weak and had a little difficulty recovering. I added a product to better diversify, and at the end of the class, I finished 5th, although I did see that there was definitely opportunity for me to perhaps, if there were a couple more iterations of decision making, I perhaps could have finished 3rd or 4th and had that happen. From a brand performance perspective, my brand Most started out strong but faced tough competition, first with the savers market, and then when it switched over to the shoppers market. My brand More I introduced in the second period. Well, as you know, brand awareness is hard at first to make sure that consumers know the brand is out there, and so the brand started to grow, but it took time to make sure that everyone was familiar with it and aware of it. Move was really a weak product, and I evaluated phasing it out, but instead I introduced R&D in the second period to improve the product so I could market another consumer segment. As a result, from a consumer segment perspective, Most ended up finishing 2nd in the shopper segment, More was 2nd in the saver segment, and Move was 1st in the explorer segment. So how would I rank my performance overall? Well, it definitely wasn't excellent, definitely wasn't bad. I learned a lot from the assignment, so I opted to rank it, in the yellow area. Our stock price index started improving towards the end of the class. Had there been more time, I think it would have even had the opportunity to move a little towards the green. The arrow could have moved towards the green. How did I do financially? Well, if you see here, it was a little bit rough in the 4th and the 5th period. You'll see that earnings had actually went negative those periods. This was for a couple of reasons. One is, as a result of the R&D that I completed, this definitely drove my cost of goods sold high. My cost for producing each unit increased. As a result, I needed to sell more, and it took until the 6th period really to get my levels of sales back where they were in the 1st period. Another cause, I think, was some of the selling costs that I had after the result of the R&D projects. there was some excess inventory that I had to get rid of at a loss. So as a result of a couple of these factors, there was some time for recovery after doing the R&D projects that I hadn't anticipated. And so had I known that, I maybe even tried to do R&D sooner in the process, but unfortunately, it took some time to recover. What you will see in the sixth period is a couple good things. One is earnings are back in the green. Volume sold is higher than it was in the first period, which is good. And I'm starting to grow the market share both in value and unit, while it was reducing over the prior two periods. So definitely improving there. So moving on and looking at some of the marketing key factors, the first one I want to talk with you about is market segmentation. My market segmentation strategy involved targeting 3 of the 5 consumer segments. My target objective was to grow our stock price index for Magneto Industries. It didn't work quite as well as I'd planned, but that was my intent. As part of the market segmentation, I targeted the savers and the shopper segments primarily because they were going to be growing the most. They'd be doubling over 5 years or growing by 50%. And I opted to target the Explorer segment because I saw by looking at the multi-dimensional scaling that no one else was strongly going after them at the time. So you'll see below from my segmentation strategy, I spent the majority of the advertising and media and research. I spent it by targeting each of my individual brands and spending the advertising dollars that I had earmarked for them strictly on those consumer segments. So for example, for more, I was going after Saver, so I spent all of my advertising dollars on the Saver segment. With most, I spent the majority of it on the Shopper segment. And Move, I spent all of it on the Explorer segment. By doing this, my goal was to increase awareness levels and purchase intentions for those groups. It definitely took time to get them where I wanted them to be, and they still at the end of the class still weren't where I wanted, but definitely were starting to show growth. So moving on and looking at positioning and targeting. Positioning really applies the 4 Ps: the price, the promotion, the place, the product, to create the image of the preferred product for targeting marketing segments. The way I looked at this is I had 2 opportunities I could do to better position my products. One is I could either apply R&D, which I did by having 2 projects to improve 2 of my products, or by using perceptual advertising, which I also used to better match my products with user preferences. What I did was I found that by using perceptual advertising, I could try to close the gap by reviewing the multidimensional scaling study and looking at the consumer segments and what their ideal points were. While I couldn't necessarily get them spot on where consumers wanted them to be, by getting them closer, I was able to increase the sales for those segments. So moving on, looking at the 4 Ps, for the product in particular, as I mentioned, I leveraged 2 R&D projects to modify the product characteristics. The first one that I did was I modified the most brand significantly to target the shoppers market by improving both the performance and the convenience characteristics. The second one, I modified the Move to target explorers mostly with a performance change. So what you'll see at the bottom in the diagram below, definitely made some changes to increase both the performance and the convenience characteristics of these products. It definitely was an evolution to get them where the customers wanted them to be. The other point to mention here is I added the More product in the second period to replace the Move product share for Savers. So if you see here, Move was replaced by More, having the same characteristics, and this allowed me to still target the Savers market. Looking at the price characteristic of the marketing mix, I then leveraged multidimensional scaling diagrams to extensively compare the economy and to the convenience and the performance of the products. One key thing to note here is I did include the ideal point evolution for the products because, as you know, the market is constantly changing. I could change the products to meet the current expectations of customers, but I don't know where those are going to be the next period. So I tried to take that into play. And using this, I use this to both drive my R&D projects as well as to extrapolate what I thought I needed to do for perceptual advertising to better influence these factors so that my consumers would want to buy these products. I did attempt to apply some market skimming strategies. It didn't work as well as I intended, but attempted to apply them. So a couple things to note here is if you look at the competing products and how they compared, well, if you look at Lock and More, if you look at it from a pricing perspective, I did with More, I attempted to undercut Lock a little bit by keeping it a few dollars lower. Unfortunately, if you see here, market share did not grow as much as I intended. My brand awareness, frankly, wasn't high enough. This was a new product. I spent a lot on advertising to grow the awareness, but it wasn't enough since it was new, and Lock had already, let's say, locked in its place in the market as a leader for savers. If you then look at most for shoppers, I did have the brand awareness levels that I intended, and purchase intentions were actually quite high. But if you see, Noon was just a little bit more preferred by shoppers, primarily due to a little bit better performance and convenience characteristics than the most product. And then lastly, with Move, Move had the highest market share of this Explorer segment, and this was partially because I did have a lower price product, and it had really high brand awareness, and consumers then in that space did want it. So moving on and looking at the place characteristic of the marketing mix, I spent my advertising budget where explorers and shoppers and savers shop for each respective product. I used the distribution panel to determine how to better allocate the marketing consumer teams to meet their demands. And from this, I learned, if you see here, I learned that shoppers frequented mass merchandisers and specialty shops over online stores. Savers did the majority of shopping in mass merchandisers, and the explorers tended to shop frequently in specialty shops. So based on this, if you see below in the commercial team decisions, I opted to locate my commercial teams based on the market segment distribution preferences of my consumers. So by doing this, I hope to better target the distribution channels that my consumer base was frequenting. So moving on into the promotion aspect of the marketing mix, promotion is integral to segmentation, targeting, and positioning, all the topics that we've covered already. Well-positioned products are easier to promote. Less well-positioned products require strong advertising investment. Since More was a new product, it required time to grow brand awareness. I didn't quite have enough time due to the short number of periods that I had. By period 4, Most and Move had reached my desired awareness levels of about 67-68%. But if you see, More wasn't quite where I wanted it to be in the saver segment at about 49%. Had I had more marketing spending or marketing funding, I would have liked to grow the brand awareness higher than what you can see here on the right-hand side of the slide. So what is some of the, just to wrap up, what are some of the lessons that I learned that I had from this class that I'd like to share with others? Well, first of all, I think it's really important to effectively execute marketing positioning. Target only one product in the portfolio for only one segment out of the gate. Don't over-diversify like I did at the beginning of the class. Also, don't focus 2 products in the same segment. This will help you avoid market cannibalization. My 2 products, Most and More, did at some points also both target the saver segment, and this was a mistake that definitely I would hope that others could avoid in the future. Also use the multidimensional scaling to analyze consumer perception from the get-go. Don't discover this tool later on. This will help you to better position your brands from out of the gate. Another key point to mention is apply just-in-time manufacturing. Focus on producing the right quantity in order to meet demand and not create surplus like I did, which result in either inventory holding or inventory selling costs, and eliminate the inventory carrying costs as much as possible. In addition, I would recommend focusing on advertising over Salesforce. In my perception is I didn't feel like the customer team did as much as the commercial team did as much as I would have liked them to. The sales new markets, but not as much if the brand is already well known. And also, once you hire the commercial team, you tend to be stuck with them once you have them. Also, continuing with that, using a long-term strategy, MarketStrat seems much like a game of chess, and it's best to plan ahead even 2 or 3 periods. You need to react quickly to product additions and changes. And also I recommend using R&D and using it quickly and early on, and be sure to take into account how your consumer bases are going to change. Another key point that I recommend is look at financial data closely and pay very close attention to your P&L, and don't discount any of those rows if you don't know what they mean. My last recommendation would be to treat this as a team project over an individual effort. I did attempt this as an individual effort, but I would recommend in the future, I think it's better to complete it as a team and to assign specific marketing managers to manage each of the projects versus attempting to take it on alone. So in summary, those are my findings from the MarketStrat assignment for the marketing management class. Thank you, and I think this was a great opportunity and a very educational class to take.